Hey there! Welcome to a little series on getting Git to work with GameMaker. So first, I want to say that this video, this first one, is just going to be a discussion of Git, what it is, what it looks like to use, and me justifying which tools I'm going to be recommending to you. But if you want to jump straight to downloading everything and setting it up, then you can jump right into the next one. So let's jump in. So let's take a step back and let me just frame our goal here so that we know what we're working towards. So we want to have source control set up for our GameMaker project. And what I mean by source control is a way to save different versions of our project and maintain them. So essentially, we want to be able to make snapshots or versions of the project. Say whenever we add a new feature to the game, in the language of Git, we'll be calling these commits. And we also want a way to be able to move between these versions or snapshots of our project if we need to check out some old code or roll back to a previous version. We also probably want to save all of these versions online, somewhere that isn't tied to our local machine, so that we don't have one point of failure. If our computer breaks, we don't want to just throw away all of our work on a game. And likewise, we want to have our project be accessible so that other people can work on the game with us. So as you probably already know, we can tick off some of these by just using Dropbox and manually saving copies of our game to it, maintaining those backups ourselves. But, and especially if you're working with other people, this can become very clunky. And what we're going to be setting up is a system that is a lot more rigorous and nice and easy to use. First, I want to skip right to the end of all of this and kind of show you what it looks like to use Git, what the workflow might be, so that we can contextualize the later discussion. So this entire setup will involve 4 parts. We're going to have our GameMaker project, and then we're going to have a system of source control. The one that we're using is called Git, but there are other ones. The third thing is a GUI interface, so the thing that we're actually using or interacting with as the user to make source control work, to take snapshots of our project and save it. And the one that I'm going to be recommending and using is called GitHub Desktop. Again, there are other ones. And in fact, GameMaker also has built-in tools to use source control and to interact with it. And I'm not going to be using that. We're going to discuss a little bit later why that is. But yeah, those fill kind of the same role. And then lastly, we are going to have a place to host the repository or the project that is using source control, a place to put that online. And we're going to be using GitHub for that. Again, there are other ones though. So note that despite a lot of those having very similar names, they're all different. So we've got Git, which is the system of source control. It is not the same as GitHub, where we put the project online. All that is basically like a server where we put the project, but it doesn't do any of the actual source control itself. And then we have that interface called GitHub Desktop, which again isn't actually essential to the system of source control. We could just use a terminal, for instance, and git commands. The interface is just kind of dressing up a lot of that to make it easier for us to use. So don't worry too much if a lot of that doesn't make sense. We're going to be going through all of those. I'm going to show you how all of these fit together first, and then we will step through them a bit more detail, because I have made deliberate choices at each point, and I don't want you to feel like this is the only way that you have to do it. If you start to have questions like, why are we doing it this way? Couldn't we do it another way? Isn't it simpler this way? Those are all great questions, and I want you to hold on to them if you start to have them, because there are answers. And there are alternatives. This is an area that a lot of work has been done on, and it makes sense for different companies, different projects, different types of projects to use different tools. And I'm coming at this as someone who uses GameMaker, as someone who works in smaller teams. I know a lot of you guys will be working by yourselves. So I want to come at all of this from that perspective and do away with some of the complexity that we don't need. So right here, I have my GameMaker project. You can see it doesn't have much in it except a couple of sprites and an object. I started this series with just an empty project for the sake of simplicity, but you can absolutely go into this with a larger project already set up. It doesn't matter. So I have already installed Git, which is our source control system. We'll be downloading that in the next video. But keep in mind, that's kind of like a silent player at the moment. It isn't represented by a tool itself. You can use it with a console, but it's just something that you install on your computer that you can invoke by using commands or by using an interface. Like I said, it's the actual thing that watches our files and tracks the changes. So if I, for example, look at this project, if I go into my Documents GameMaker Studio 2 and this one is called Rocket Surfing, these are all of the files involved in my project. And you can see there's also a git.git file and a .git attributes. That's because I've initialized Git in this project and that's the stuff it needs to do all of its watching and everything. But yeah, you can set that up on any file. Let me be clear. Everything that we're going to be discussing, you can apply to any other project because source control, it's just watching a bunch of files and tracking the changes. Doesn't matter what those are. Anything that we put in here, Git is going to track. That is actually kind of one reason why I'm not using the built-in GameMaker tools. I want to make it kind of clear that it's not like this is particular to GameMaker. You could apply this to other stuff. But more on that a little bit later before I get ahead of myself. That's kind of all I need. I have a project and then I have Git. And like I said, you can just use a terminal. I actually have something called Git Bash. So if I just open that up, I'm going to recommend in the next tutorial that you download this too. But it's just like a nicer little terminal. And we could, for example, you can type git push, git whatever, all from within the console, but it's just a lot nicer in an interface. But again, just to make it clear that Git is the system of source control here, the thing that's actually doing the work for us. And along the way, whenever we do change any of the files in our GameMaker project, it will log those changes, be it sprites, be it code, anything that we change in here, we'll be able to save. And we'll actually dive quite deeply into the structure of a GameMaker project, probably in one of the last tutorials if you're curious, really digging into like what it means to have an object and what these files do, what the YYP file actually does. Yeah, that one's a lot of fun. Okay, so now onto my GUI that I will be recommending. This one is called GitHub Desktop. All right, so GitHub Desktop is not the same thing as GitHub, like the online website that we use to host our repository. This is the GUI interface that kind of, instead of us typing commands into a console, we can just press a button instead. And I really like this one. For me, this is the simplest one I've ever used. I've used a few. It's the easiest one I've found to teach other people. The interface is really nice. And I'll talk a little bit about how this actually works later. Lastly, we do have GitHub itself, which is where we will be hosting our repository, it's called. This is where our project exists online. And we, again, technically don't need this. We could maintain a project using source control just locally on our computer and not have an online copy. But you have another layer of security if you do host something online in a server, because if your computer breaks down or something happens, there's another copy that exists somewhere else. And it also makes it possible, of course, to work with other people a lot easier. So to review, Git is the system of source control that does the actual work for us. It's watching the files. GitHub Desktop is just our GUI, our graphical user interface to use Git. And then we have GitHub, our host. And of course, our GameMaker project. And the last piece of the puzzle that I won't really be talking about probably until one of the very latest tutorials is downloading and using an external code editor to handle merge conflicts. And I'm not going to talk about that too much in these first ones because it might not come up, especially for a solo developer. It might. You can. It is still possible, especially if you're using multiple machines. But yeah, it's going to add another layer of complication. But for that, I would recommend Visual Studio Code. So if you wanted to download it all at once, that's what I would recommend. So I want to show you the absolute basics of what it would look like to kind of create a new copy of the project, to make some changes, review them, use this tool, and then save it. So you can see in GitHub Desktop, I have these two tabs. I have a history tab and a changes tab. History is where I can view all of the previous, what's called commits, which are basically just snapshots of the project. And you can see all of them have a silly title here. Most of them aren't very rigorous, but yeah, those are an example of some commits. And you can think of these, like I said, like snapshots of the project. And here they describe changes. Now, despite the appearance that they only capture the changes, each commit is actually basically a copy of the entire project. And as a result, we can roll back to any of these and check out a previous commit or a previous snapshot, and then mess around with the project in that state, like review old code. If you've, for example, done something catastrophic and you need to move your entire project back to a previous commit and then start fresh, remove the rest, you can do that. But yeah, so these are the changes at each point. So like right here, this was when there was nothing in the project and I did my first initialization of Git in the project. There was nothing there. And then I added all of the GameMaker files. So you can see everything that is kind of there when you start a project. We have a bunch of option files that get added. A room by default, some stuff in the YYP file. Don't worry if that makes no sense at all. We actually, like I said, we will be exploring this a little bit in a later one. And you can see this is all green because these are additions. This is stuff that I have added to my repository that didn't used to be there. So I used to have an empty file just with that stuff, and then I added all of that in. And then I made a commit at that point. So I typed in, copied over all files, you know, just like this, copied over all files, and then I hit commit right here. And notice that it says commit to main, and you can see up here, we are currently on a branch called main. You can see the history here, and it's like a branch, you know, it's a branch that's slowly growing. But you can have multiple branches that are, they have different information on them. So 2 different users might be working on different branches and then what's called merge them back together. It is entirely possible to just have one branch and just use that, especially as a solo developer. But that's what that means. That's why it says commit to main, which is kind of like the default one that you started off with. It used to be called master, but a lot of repository hosts and source control systems are swapping over to main. But back to the history tab. So you can see, those ones were additions, but we have in other places some deletions as well. So in here you can see so something got deleted, something got added. And this is actually a good place to explain another thing. Although this says deletion and then an addition, it's what I've actually done in this case. This was actually adding I think a create event, perhaps, or maybe a draw event. It must have been a draw event. As a user, all I did was add the draw event, but Git only uses the language of additions and deletions. So modify, although it makes sense to us, for Git, that just means you got rid of the old thing and you added a new thing. So it's kind of treated as a deletion and then an addition. So let's add something to the project just so I can show you what it looks like. So for example, if I, let's say, add a create event, I'm going to add a line of code. Let's say x equals 24. I'm going to save that and I'm going to head back to here. So now you can see that something has come up in changes. There are 2 changes to the project. Let's have a look. So I clicked on changes and you can see that there was a change to this file and to this file. So to the objrocket create event and also something called an objrocket.yy file. And that one's kind of like the object asset itself, the file for that. And this one right here is like a separate GML file. You can see .gml where we added the actual line of code. And you can see those are in different places. But if I added another line of code, so say, let's add y equals 283, and we come back, there it is. So this is a kind of silly example. Realistically, you would probably code a lot longer than that and something that would actually have an impact on the game. But say that I've been doing that and I've decided, I've wrapped up enough of a bundle of work that I think it's time to commit something. I've finished a little implementation, a little feature of the game, and I want to make a commit. And we will talk a little bit later, probably in the next tutorial, about the process of deciding when you should make commits or like some heuristics for that. But yeah, say I decide to do it now, and I'm just going to say, so a little summary of what I've done. Set rockets position, And if I wanted to, if I was being a bit more rigorous, if this wasn't very self-explanatory or I'm running out of room, I might want to describe things in more detail in the description. Depends how thorough you want to be. Sometimes it's not really necessary. But yeah, so, I could say like set the X position, set the Y position. This would be pretty ridiculous to actually do. But yeah, just as an example, so I can show you what it will look like. And then when I'm done, I can hit commit. So let's do that. All right, so we have now made a new snapshot of our project. And if I come back to history, you can see it's there, just like the other ones. And this point is crucial. That snapshot now exists on my local machine. Like I said, we have Git installed. It is doing the work of tracking changes in our project, maintaining a history of snapshots. That is now on my machine. However, if I head over to my GitHub repository, and you can see I'm on my rocket surfing project, and I head over to the commits. It's a little bit hard to find, I have to say, but that one right there. My latest commit, which remember we called set rocket's position, is not there, right? Even if I reload. But it is on my computer. It is on my local copy of this project. And you can see it has a little arrow here and here as well. It's telling us to push the origin. It used to say fetch, and now it's telling me that I need to push this. This is why earlier I said we don't necessarily need this online copy, this remote copy, to go about working with Git in GameMaker. I could go forever without pushing this off to any repository and just rely on my local copy. But if I did want to do that, I would have to push this change off to the remote, which basically applies these same changes to the remote copy as well. Just like I've done on this project, it will apply the same changes to the remote. Whether that change is an addition or a deletion, it will apply anything that I've done in here. And that is a key point. There are two copies of the project. There is not one copy that I'm working off of and that is stored in the cloud. It's two different copies, a local copy and one online. This point is easily overlooked, and it can result in a lot of confusion, especially because this isn't how all systems of source control necessarily have to work. Git is called a distributed system for this reason. If we had a team of people working on this, they would all have local copies of the project or the repository on their machine. And we have the remote one that we're all pushing changes off to. And then we are also pulling changes in. So if someone else makes a change, did what we just did, pushed it off, and in fact, let's do that, let's push. Everyone else would now need to get that change because a change has been made to the remote copy and they need to keep their version in sync. And therein actually lies a lot of the trouble. It's in trying to keep all of these different copies in sync, problems can arise. If there is a discrepancy between anyone's copy and they try to pull in that change, you can get a conflict. For example, I was working on a bit of code, so I put something in the create event and someone else did the same thing on the same line, and then we both pushed off our changes. We're both making changes to the same thing, and someone needs to decide which of those changes is going to win, or actually if we can actually help both of them. But yeah, so we'll be talking about merge conflicts a bit later, but yeah, I really want to emphasize that point that we are working off our local copy and that Git is a distributed system because we all have different copies. So like I alluded to earlier, there are other systems of source control that are not distributed, and everyone can work off like one single copy that's on a server, which does have its advantages because I think you can kind of reduce the number of conflicts because some of them like necessitate that only one person can grab an area of the project and then start working on it, and they would have to release it back for someone else to start making changes. But a lot of those you have to buy, and they come with their own downsides or differences. And Git is just probably the most popular one out there. Hopefully that makes sense. It's you start digging a little under the surface and you can see kind of like how complicated it really is and how, stuff that seems perhaps arbitrary, it does have a reason. These things are just made differently for different use cases. And all of this is another reason that I quite like GitHub Desktop. If I did have to push things off, it does give me like a little reminder, a little arrow that I need to push that off. And likewise, it does also alert me if there is a change I need to pull in. It would appear up here. This fetch origin up here is actually kind of detecting if there is something that we need to pull. I can press that myself and have a look. It didn't find any, and it will refresh itself every few minutes, which is really nice. So now I've actually gone and made an addition myself to Curious Rocketeer's rocket project. So I've added Friendly Cosmonaut myself to the project, and I made some changes. Which is weird because you would have thought I was here this entire time making a tutorial and speaking to you, but somehow through some time traveling magic, we were able to do this. So let's go ahead and click Fetch Origin again. So it hasn't updated itself, but if we do it manually, and you can see that right there. So it's fetched the changes, and yeah, now we can pull them in. So for larger pulls, when we're loading in a lot of stuff, I would kind of recommend that you close GameMaker before you do this. But I don't think this one is going to be too big, and I want to show you what happens when you actually do this while GameMaker is up and running. So if we pull in, so this should sync our project with what is on the repository. And you can see right there, so there is a commit, a snapshot that has been added by Friendly Cosmonaut. And you can see right here, like a little description. There are 8 changes that were made. It has like a little tag. Every single commit has a different tag on it. We can use that to swap back to it. And you can go through them right here. So you can see on the YYP, there's this line that has been added. That actually means that I've added a object resource and a sprite resource. Like I said, we're going to actually be looking at the YYP in a later tutorial. I have this line of code. I've added a GML file to the project, the create event of a ball, a step event of the ball itself. We've made a change to the room, maybe adding that into the actual room, and a beautiful green sprite as well. So if we come back to the project, you can see that GameMaker itself was capable of detecting that there was a change in the project that it needs to reload, kind of. It needs to update itself so it can get that change in for us. Sometimes GameMaker is pretty good about this. I've found that it can kind of break, but more on deletion. So for example, if I had a sprite open and the change that I'm pulling in was a deletion to the sprite, it can get a bit wonky then because I had it up somewhere in the workspace, but normally additions are pretty good, so I think we'll be fine, and we should just be able to reload. We don't want to save because that would be saving our project. Yeah, we want to reload, hotload the changes in. And you can see, so now I have a ball object. If I come into the room, that was entirely blank before, there's a ball there. That was added by user-friendly Cosmonaut. So that is the basics of what using Git would look like with GameMaker, and hopefully that helps contextualize a lot of that stuff. So I'm going to leave it here for this tutorial because we've essentially wrapped up the essentials of what I wanted to cover. I do still want to provide more of an explanation as to why I've chosen some of these specifically, and especially why I'm not using the built-in GameMaker source control, but I'm gonna separate that into another video that will kind of be an appendix, I guess, with that, because it's not essential, and if you just want to dive into installing everything, you can absolutely just skip the next one and go straight to installing. So regardless, thank you for watching, and I will catch you in another tutorial. Or maybe not, maybe bye forever.